joined by our two special guests, Allegra Clark and Ratana. Please come on up, watch the rickety stairs. We should have done it the other way, but that's okay, it doesn't matter. To discuss living storytelling in games. Good to see you again.
It's a pleasure.
You survived the last interview. We're all good. Like
We're still here.
I'm not on the blacklist. Like we're
No,
Hang on,
not
let me
yet.
check.
Not yet. Okay,
Not
great.
yet.
We've still got one day to go.
It's true.
We can do it.
It's true.
You know what? The show will be perfect tomorrow.
Isn't that always the way?
Always.
Yeah, it's one of those. I've always said with a lot of conventions, if you hit 1 p.m. on the Saturday and everything's going okay, it's smooth sailing. It's
For
that
sure.
first 3 hours. That's your
Yeah.
make or break. So,
The old theater thing is if tech goes well, then something's going to get messed up
yeah.
in the first on opening night.
Exactly
Yeah,
right.
for sure.
It's like tech needs to be a disaster.
Yeah.
Your final run through needs to
It
be a
needs
disaster.
to feel like chaos. You need to want to like cry every night, and then the show is great.
And then the show's
perfect. Yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, in Australia, I always say if the punters don't know, then what problems? What problems are you talking about? Everyone had fun. Yeah. We'll
problems.
deal with that later. You know. Yeah.
Right.
That's a later problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
But it is great to have you back, and
Thank you.
I appreciate your time. So today the conversation is a little bit different, and it's more of a kind of a specific focus on your video game roles. So
Great.
obviously we had the panel yesterday. You mentioned such a wide range of both live action, anime, so many roles. But I guess like gaming ones, I feel gaming as a medium is different. Is there a feel like when you guys come into a gaming role, is the preparation different? Like, do you have to approach it in a different way that you would to a standard kind of anime or whatever the case may be?
I think as an actor, the preparation is very similar across the different roles, but when you're doing a game, the amount of time that you get to spend with the character is different.
Yeah.
And so depending on how deeply you are entrenched with the character, if you're like one of the main characters, or if you have a pretty specific story arc, you're going to be with them for a while, over multiple sessions, multiple months.
It also depends on how many words the game has.
Exactly.
You know?
And so you get a lot more time with them, versus like, in an
Additional voices.
Yes, exactly. Or if I'm doing an animated series, if I'm there for, a guest star role or whatever, I'm there for a day.
Yeah.
I'm there for 4 hours. We're going
Yep.
to do a bunch of stuff, and then I'm going to forget about it and leave. Whereas, for video games, I've lived with some of these characters for years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the technical expectations are a little bit different as well because,
sure.
unlike in animation, you're going to record things wild, maybe in a group record, and then do some ADR later. With a game, you're going to be doing a mix of, timed lines because they're just like, we have this much time for an attack, so you have to do this, versus the wild lines versus the stuff that will be to picture. So, on any given day, you can be doing literally anything. It could be like, and today we're doing all the combat. And you're
Right.
like, cool, yeah.
And you don't know what you're doing until you walk into that booth and it flashes up on a screen.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that was going to be one of my questions. Was like, do you go in and it's like, okay, so we've got say 10 days of recording, and it's going to be this, and then it's going to be that, or is it just kind of, oh no, we need to have this ready for, like they just basically throw it to you on the day kind of thing?
There is a
Depends
giant
on the
spreadsheet
project.
that they put in front of you, yeah.
Yeah, right.
If you're lucky, sometimes we get the script ahead of time, but that is very rare.
And, sometimes, especially with localized games, a localized game, the script is already mostly
most of
done.
it. Yeah.
Not only because it's being translated from another language, but because they like to have everything translated before we go in and
Correct.
start working, versus something like a Dragon Age or a Starfield,
Yep.
where they were still actively writing over
Right.
the course of the
Many
sessions.
moons, yes.
So that was going to be it's a really good. That was going to be one of my questions.
Oh, there we go.
Exactly, that was I guess compared
We're
to
just going to
say
set it up and...
you don't know. I'm
Yeah,
loving
there
it.
we go.
We can just
Boom.
segue. I shouldn't call them out. People wouldn't notice. But I feel like there has to be surely a difference between a localized where it is, here is the emotions being conveyed, here is the story as it's being told, and here's how we've converted it to either local idioms or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
As opposed to a Dragon Age, we're like, you know what? This line might be better. Can we try it with this? The processes, I assume, are a bit different that way.
And
Yeah.
there are always opportunities for rewrites
Absolutely.
and everything when it's a localized game. But like when you're doing something like Starfield, Dragon Age, etc., like you're the one crafting the character in the first
Right.
place. So they're a little bit more
there's more flexibility
Yeah.
to play.
Yeah.
You know, whereas like when we've done localized, there's an OG,
Yeah.
and they have it in their head, and we may or may not get that for a reference, but they definitely have like a vibe that they're trying to hit, or a certain, you know, feeling that they want to convey, or
Yeah.
certain words that you need to hit because it'll come back later in the
Yeah.
storyline.
Yeah. It's you know, you still have a lot of room to play when you're doing a localized game, but you have to play within the boundaries of what the original,
Yeah.
you know,
It's like getting
Japanese
a
or
coloring book
Chinese,
where they've
yeah.
kind of half already colored.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess the other part of that as well is one of the probably the big changes I've seen in all my many years of playing, especially Japanese games, is how quickly localization happens. It feels like it's an earlier part of the process. Previously, it was the game would come out in Japan. It does reasonably well enough. There's enough groundswell. Then they do it. Now it seems like, yeah, especially when you're talking
It's
like
happening
Sega and
kind of
stuff, it's a part of the
simultaneously
process.
now, yeah.
I feel like people have followed the Netflix model of localization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, whereas before you waited to see if something was a hit, and then you would invest to make it local in whatever language.
Yeah.
Now it's, no, everything's going to hit at the same time. We're just going to throw all of the money in the pot, and then you're going to get it in English, French, Brazilian, Portuguese, you know, everything
Even if the
else.
audio isn't recorded in those languages,
Exactly.
at least
Yeah.
the subtitles exist in those languages. I feel like, I know this is technically a games panel specifically, but like the only area in which like that is you still have the finished it and then it comes out thing is when it's like a simul dub or something. So like
Correct.
Yeah.
Jujutsu
Yeah.
Kaisen, you know, the episode would come out in English 2 weeks after it came out in Japanese
Yeah.
because we're recording it the week after it airs in Japan.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I again, it has been interesting to see the shift of those models, like
Yeah.
you mentioned with the change in the like. I feel like even when they talk localization, when they're writing it, it's already kind of like a lot of the jokes land in different languages. And is that something you've noticed as you've done it from over time, that the localizations seem to either be more, there's just more thought put into it, I feel like. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think we know that it's a global audience. It's not just one market that drives everything now. So I love that there's that attention that's paid.
Yeah.
And then it gives us the opportunity to just kind of like inform the narrative a little bit more than I think if you were getting it like third, fourth, fifth hand.
Gotcha. Yeah.
The greatest localization I worked on, and I mean this with absolutely no shade to all the other wonderful localizations I've worked on, was I, the Somnium Files.
Yeah.
Because that game is full of puns.
Yes.
Yes.
And
The Japanese do love their puns.
They
and you've
love
gotta-
their
yeah.
puns,
Yeah.
and everything was a pun. So they needed to make those puns work in
Yeah.
English. And if it wasn't going to work in English, they would just come up with a new pun that
Yeah.
still
Oh
fit the
my God.
situation.
I would have loved to work on that game.
It was brilliant, and it's so creative. Like, what a satisfying thing. I was just so impressed with the writing on that game because of, like, again, this joke in Japanese will absolutely not translate. It will not land in English.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do instead? Because we don't want it to...
Yeah. You want the
The-
spirit and the letter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like we need to... The sentiment of it is that someone is making a bad pun.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Not that the pun has to be about this specific thing.
Yeah,
Right.
the topic is irrelevant more than, I guess, the intention behind it. Like,
Exactly.
if you're
Yeah.
telling a dad joke, it's still got to be a dad joke in whatever language you're
Absolutely.
localizing to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, it has to sell the idea that the other character in the scene might go like, oh, boo, you know?
Well, even as a consumer, and the guy, my production team were back on this, Yakuza 3 compared to Yakuza 4, where Sega really started to take that into account, and Yakuza 3, and they're translating Anarchy as boss, and I'm like, ish, and I'm like, ish, and I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm like, I get why you've done that, but I don't think that it conveys the spirit. And then come 4, where they're working together from that early process. It was probably one of the first games I really noticed that they'd started integrating it early, and
Yeah.
these jokes
Yeah.
were starting to land.
And I feel like, and you probably noticed this too as an actor, you can tell the difference between when they ran it through Google Translate
Oh, yeah.
versus when they ran it by somebody who's a native speaker.
Bit of organic,
Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
organic nature to it, yeah.
There definitely been a couple of
for
auditions
sure.
I've gotten where it's like, this grammatically is
Oh yeah.
bad.
Or
And then-
I am saying words, but I don't know what I am saying. Makes no sense.
And then you have to kind of decide, do you want to rewrite the line in the audition to at least like have
Right.
the proper grammar, or is that overstepping?
Yeah.
Or is it done deliberately and they just want to know I can wrap my lips around these weird words?
Oh my God, it's
Right?
it's so auditions.
And I guess that's the other thing as well is, if you have these other language backgrounds as well, you mentioned Italian and obviously the different, like, if you see it in those, like, you know what the slang sounds like. One of the first things when I learned Japanese was I insisted on learning the slang because you want to sound natural.
Absolutely.
It's not about sound. It's good to sound correct when you're in a business meeting, but if you're at local izakaya, you want to sound natural as much as any gaijin can, right?
Yeah.
I had 10 years of French, like, from Catholic school nuns. And then when I went to Paris, I'm like, they don't sound like this at all.
No, they don't.
And it was like relearning.
Yeah. I gave up on French at 99. I'm like...
Ah ouais.
Ouais, pourquoi?
No. It's that's no good.
Mais pourquoi? Le français est une belle langue.
Ouais. D'accord.
D'accord?
Ouais.
C'est tout, juste le ouais, d'accord?
On parle en français maintenant?
No, I gave up on 99. Like, I did like the first... I did the introductory lessons, and then I'm like, why is the table masculine and the chair feminine? And that was enough for me. I was like, this language is silly, even by a silly language standard.
Ce n'est pas gentil dire ça. C'est une belle langue. Sorry, I've been speaking French since I was 3 years old.
Gotcha. I guess you kind of hinted at it before, but with video games, you mentioned that when you're doing like an anime performance, you might be there, here are your lines, here's the role you have to play, and you're in a show for 10 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes, right?
Sure.
Whatever the case may be. But with a game, it's multiple levels. It's the cutscenes, it's those hard, hard-hitting, soulful cutscenes, but then it's also, like, it's
Absolutely.
also, you mentioned gore takes yesterday when we were talking and stuff like that. So does the preparation change a little bit when you go into it, or is it just still treat it like a job and just know that you're going to be with it a little bit longer?
Oh, for me, you have to treat it like a job.
Yeah.
And you just keep going. And then if you know, like if I know I'm going to be in a screamy session, then I'll prepare myself physically differently.
Yeah.
Or we'll
And
take a break
schedule
so I
yourself.
can... Exactly.
In specific ways, too.
You know, so I'm scheduling myself so I have time for vocal rest. And we take a break so I can do a little extra warming up. And sometimes we're not prepared for that. And they're like, well, today you're going to die 74 different ways. Great.
And you're like, no,
Can I do it at the end?
But I have another session after this.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I guess we're mentioning like those kind of, those takes that require exertion, or at the very least kind of conveying action, if you will. Like, you mentioned the preparation. Is there a secret to a good action take? Like you mentioned yesterday, even just the motion can add that little bit extra to the timbre of your voice. Like,
I mean,
That's really it,
Yeah, for me, it's you use your whole body.
Yeah.
You know, because when we are running, you don't run in place like this.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
We're
Unless
not
you're
Irish
Naruto
step
running and then
dancers.
just
Yeah,
out the back,
exactly.
yeah.
But even then,
Ibis
there's
in
something
Persona
happening.
3 does this, runs like that.
So,
It's
you know,
beautiful.
if I'm going to run on microphone, I'm going to run like I'm on microphone. And I'm going to take breaths because I'm, trying to catch my oxygen. And so I use my whole body.
Yeah.
And if I'm not sweating or feeling a little lightheaded afterwards, I've probably done it wrong.
Or even like something stupid, like if you're playing a character who's chained up.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do it like this, but if you're chained up like that,
absolutely.
it changes the way it sounds a little bit
Absolutely.
as opposed to like this.
because you've got your lungs have more space to move,
Exactly.
all those kind of little things.
Right.
Like this. Yeah. So,
It's little subtle things that maybe you don't hear, but
Yeah.
like, you know.
But you can tell. If you
know.
close your eyes and listen, you know the difference between I'm just doing it like this or I'm doing it,
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I guess from your point of view, being that you've got these words, you've got these scripts, whatever's written in front of you, and you've got to convey that, you've got to give it life, you've got to breathe that into it. Does the interactive nature of games change that in some way? Like, is it? I guess from your point of view, it's like you mentioned, the length of time you spend with the character might be longer, but I guess when it's at its core, it's still performing, it's still kind of putting your soul into theirs and becoming them for that brief moment in time.
we're still telling the story of the character. And then I think depending on the session and what's happening is just you rely on your directors and your writers to give you the context
Yeah.
and to remind you like what's happening before or what's going to happen next so that you can set it up properly
Yeah.
and serve the story.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, Is there something you look for in a game role, like if, compared to say an anime role or whatever? Like you mentioned, you may do even 2 anime roles in a day, kind of thing. Is there something you look at a game role, you're like, I can sink my teeth into this, or is it the same kind of process of it's a character I think I would enjoy doing?
I think it's the same kind of process. Like when like at the end of the day, like sometimes you go in, you're just doing a bunch of you're doing a shopkeeper in a video game, and you just know that everything you're gonna be is like, thank you, have a nice day.
Right.
Like that'll be $5.
That will be 2
that
cubits.
Stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, like whatever it is, like you have those like more surface level roles, just as you might have a little more surface level of a thing. I think again, this kind of goes back into anime, but like I played an anime character in Demon Slayer, the Spider Mom.
Yeah.
In it, and she was in like 1 episode. Like really, she had like a little bit at the end of the previous episode, but she was like a 1 episode character.
But she was a big part of that episode.
And it was her story had a beginning, a middle, and an end. It was a concise.
That show is phenomenal for that.
Beautiful story wrapped up into a little bow there.
Yeah.
So it's like, even though she was in it for so little, she had such a big impact. And it's just going to kind of depend on the character and on the writing. I mean, again, when you have good writing.
Absolutely.
Good
and,
writing
what
makes good
purpose are
things.
you serving in the story?
Yeah.
Right? Because the shopkeeper is there to enable something.
Yeah.
Right?
But sometimes the shopkeeper is also a quest giver.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe that quest has a little bit like the Starfield.
Yeah.
My Starfield shopkeeper is a quest giver, and she's the one going like, I'm really not sure. Like, we got to make sure that we get those guys out of the cave. So even though you're not necessarily, you're learning a little bit about her, but also you're getting a little bit of her personality in it.
Yeah.
Even though most of the interaction you have with her is going to be her selling you a baguette.
Like the blip over the head. Yeah. You kind of hinted at it there. I guess any time you translate. Say a Japanese project, and obviously you guys have that background as well with Chinese as well with MiHoYo and stuff.
Yeah.
When they translate it, it's a different. I always consider it a different piece of art. It is as much as anything else. It's easy to say, oh, that's just the English version of thing. I'm like, I don't think that's ever fair to say. Like, are there certain things you look for in those roles, or are there certain writers you go, oh, I think they'll be able to convey like this, like the transition or the translation, well enough that it's going to still land in the right kind of ways.
What I think is really nice right now is it's not so much translation as it is adaptation.
Yes.
So like we were talking about the puns.
Yeah, very much better word. Yeah.
And so it's not just let's run it through Google Translate and see what happens when it comes out of the washing machine. It's okay, we took it out of the washing machine, but it doesn't quite fit right. Let's adjust.
Yeah.
And I feel like then it becomes a little more of a collaboration.
Yes.
And the people who are doing these adaptations nowadays, I feel like are a lot more thoughtful.
Very much.
In how they do it. And then again, and then it goes back to like just good old business. Like if it's a bigger budget thing, they're going to take some time.
Yeah, they have the luxury of taking
versus
the time.
if it's like a smaller game, an indie thing, like just one of those gotcha things that they just churn and burn through. You might not have the budget, and so they're just like, read the Google Translate.
Yeah, it's quite near enough's good enough. Like,
yeah. It really, again, like, and you don't always have the benefit when you're auditioning for something of knowing really what you're auditioning for or who's
everything is so
localizing
coded and code named that there's. By the end of the day, you have no idea what you auditioned for.
Like sometimes I go in on a project and they're just like, "Remember we worked on this?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, we were on that game." So you realize like, "Oh, you worked with this producer or this writer before," but you never know when you're actually doing the audition in the first place, or even when you get the email going like, hey, they just decided they wanted to bring you in on this thing. And
I have often gotten into the booth and gone, I don't even know what I just did.
Yeah. Or just like, what am I working on today? I like literally have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, is there a particular kind of role that you've done in a video game that stands out to you? Like you've mentioned AI Somnium Files specifically a few times, so I feel like that might influence your answer a bit there. But is there a role in gaming that you think like walked away from and said, you know what, I did really good. That was really good. I'm really glad I was involved with that project.
Oh, I mean, we could just say Fire Emblem in that regard.
Fire Emblem
Three Houses was so special.
It was so special. That's like your favorite high school musical where everybody loves each other.
Glee Club, yeah.
It's totally, but without that kind of drama.
Gotcha.
But we met each other after the fact, and then it just so happened that we all loved each other and got along, and
And the story was just so good.
And the story was good.
Heartbreaking. I mean, like I was very lucky to play Dorothea in that because she was the one who really explored like this concept of hey, we were all in school together, and now it's been 5 years, we're all at war, and I took math class with this person, and I just slit their throat.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or, in her case, it would probably be like meteor or something like that. But
Yeah.
it's. I mean, that game was so special.
Absolutely.
It was so special for the connections we made, but also the story itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm trying to I feel like I've been very lucky, and I've worked on like a couple of those.
Same.
Like,
I would say for me, like Wave, even though it doesn't get a lot of love because it was a very regional, I think, release.
Yeah.
Which game?
Wave from Marvel.
Oh,
So it was.
yeah.
Because she was the first Filipino superhero, and
Yeah.
I'm part Filipino, so it meant something to me.
Yeah.
And
it
then
had that extra.
It had the extra, cultural reference, and then we got into the booth, and they're like, "Oh, and she's Bisayan, and my mom is Bisayan, so she's from the exact same region
Yeah.
where my mother is from." And they were like, "Can you do a Bisayan accent?" I'm like, "Yeah, okay, mom, let's do mom.
Just channel that.
Let's do mom as
Let's
a
just be
superhero."
mom right now.
Yeah. So that was super special to me. But there's only a very small group of people who got to play that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dragon Age as well. Inquisition was such a special game for
Yeah.
me. It was like baby's first video game, but
Yeah.
also
Oh,
like
yeah.
a world that I loved in the first place, and a character who was so unique in the scope of the world, because like in a world of people who are really good at stabbing in order to get things done, she is the person who adamantly does not stab
She is the unstabbiest.
she is the person who,
unstabbiest.
from a moral standpoint, decided that she wanted to make sure that talking it through
Yeah.
was
Wow. So she's like
an
the
option.
therapist of the game.
She's the
She was-
diplomat.
yeah.
She is a literal diplomat. She's the ambassador to the Inquisition, and her entire purpose is going like, hey, if it ends up being that we need to throw our armies at each other, that's fine. But what if we trade favors first? Like if your wheat for my ore or something like that, that's the really easy version of it. Maybe now we have an alliance that means that, you will help
We have
me
a
in
common
this
ground.
situation.
Yeah.
Or as she literally says, common ground is the start of all negotiations.
Yeah.
Truth.
Yeah.
And it is interesting. By way of nothing else, do those complex motivations. I guess, kind of flip it a little bit. Is there a role that in a game that you've played or been a part of that you've gone, wow, like you've just appreciated from that point of view of what the actor has given to it as well? Like you've looked at it and go, wow, they've done a really great job of bringing this character to life.
So like not something that we portrayed.
No, something
but
you've either played or watched someone else perform.
Oh.
I mean, like all of The Last of Us.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful game.
I mean, that game is stunning.
Yeah.
And not just for the voice acting, but for the motion capture and everything else. And,
And complex. You want to talk about complex motivation?
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a beautiful game. It scares the crap out of me to play. But
Yeah, I can't do horror games, so
Yeah.
I watched cutscenes. I was like, I'm good. This is what I can do.
Because I think as a consumer, as someone who years of reviewing games and stuff like that, sometimes you can get a little bit business minded. It's like, I see why they made this choice. I see why they hired this person. Blah, blah, blah. And so sometimes when you are, say, watching an anime or playing a game, do you have to remind yourself sometimes that it is still an art form, like it is still an evocative medium?
Yeah, because sometimes I go in with like VO brain.
Inside baseball,
VO brain, and I've there have definitely been like times where I'm just like, why did they mic this person this way?
Sure.
Like the levels are weird, and I don't like it, and so I disconnect because I don't like the way their
it takes you out
microphone.
of the performance. Yeah.
And it makes me wonder in those situations, would someone who can't necessarily put words to what is
like they
weird.
don't have the term, but they're like, it's off.
Do they sense the same thing that I sense,
Sure.
or am I just so attuned to it that I'm like, I don't know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's fair.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
gonna,
tough.
and again, I'm gonna use it as a segue because it's one of my questions. I feel like with going back to adaptations or localizations a little bit, slang can be a weird one because obviously
sure.
there's a lot of American slang and you see these characters and it's like we assume you watch a sword and sandals epic, you watch a Roman epic or a Middle Ages or whatever, and it's always British accents because you've come to assume British accents, Laurence Olivier or whatever the case
Sure.
may be.
Well, also because the concept is that if you are in a European country and you're speaking, we are getting the game is in English, but it takes place in France, so therefore it's like it has to be British, even though that's like no, it doesn't have to technically.
And that's like the one that stood out to me really was Crackdown 3, and not a lot of people played Crackdown 3, but
I was gonna say I don't know that one.
yeah.
Me
No,
neither.
there was an Indian doctor, right? And so
Okay.
she was from India, and she'd come to the fictional country, whatever it been. And I know that as someone who Australia, we have obviously a big Indian diaspora, and I'm like, that's not how they talk. Like, it was using American slangs and American idioms. Have you noticed that in any roles where you've gone? Like you mentioned, like potential for rewrites and stuff. Like maybe we can try it this way instead because it just doesn't feel true to character, or
I sometimes, like, especially with cultural idioms, I'm not
Yeah.
going to know because I
Yeah.
have that American bias. That's how I was raised.
Yeah.
And so I trust, like, I have to trust the writers to some extent. And then if there's somebody in there, they're like, I was raised in Australia, we wouldn't say it that way. I'm like, yeah, tell me how to say it.
yeah,
Yeah, that's definitely happened. Sometimes it'll be like if I'm doing a character that has like an accent, and it's really great when the director picks up on it too. They'll go like, okay, we're gonna decontract this, and I'm like, oh, thank you,
Thank
because
God,
the
yeah.
contraction just doesn't make sense for this
Right.
character.
Yeah, yeah.
That's like those, like there are little things like that, but also actually the great example I have of this is not my own role. It was on Apex Legends. Fuse is played by Ben Prendergast, who is actually Australian.
Yeah.
But the writer, Sam Gill, is New Zealand. So there were a couple of times that, like, Sam wrote something and Ben would go, it's not quite. It's not quite. It's like, you're close, but that's not actually what it is.
if they were ever to compare too close, I mean, we joke about Canada and America, but it's us in New Zealand, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
You could do New Zealand slang to me. I'm like, well, you're a Kiwi, but at least I understand what you're saying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
And that is at least the benefit, like when it's not a localized thing. You know, I know that Elle Newlands can go like,
Yeah.
she can, who's Horizon and Apex, she can go like, well, this is the actual Scottish slang we would use, or she would add it, or
Yeah.
something
Sure.
like that.
Yeah.
Or, you know, if Johnny Young, who plays Crypto, he can be like, well, this is actually how we would say it in Korean. So
Yeah.
he can ramble off the Korean things and,
Right. Yeah.
and make those corrections. I do that with French sometimes too.
yeah.
I feel like that's where it comes in, but you know, when it's a localized thing, you don't always.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I feel like there aren't as many accents in localized.
They tend
media.
not to, I feel
Yeah.
like, you
Yeah.
know, and because when I did Tressa, which is animated, it's not a game, but they wanted a lot of like slang because I played like the young twins and they basically squabbled with each other, so
Gotcha,
I got
yeah.
to fight with myself.
Oh, I love that.
And,
That's always fun.
Just get out the
It just, you know, like, Mom, she's touching me, nah, 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 you know. But then they were like, throw in the Tagalog slang, right? So I'm like
Yeah,
basically calling my brother an asshole, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
and,
yeah.
Oh,
you know,
that's nice.
Right?
Yeah.
We love each other.
I play a lot of Dota, so I know a lot of the
Yeah.
Filipino swear words. It's,
Exactly. And so that was fun. I'm like, oh yeah, they would totally say that. And then I got to like go in my little cousin group chat and I'm like, okay guys, what's the worst stuff you've ever said to each other? Go.
Oh, that's nasty.
One of the examples that was big over here was when Overwatch first came out. They had the Australian map, and it was takeout on the wall. It's like, whoa, that's immersion breaking straight away. It's like, no, it's takeaway in Australia. It's not takeout. So,
yeah.
And it's like literally
But
half
it's
a word, you know,
it's
like
an
yeah.
But it
important
makes a
detail.
difference. It makes a difference.
It's an important detail.
Yeah, yeah. I guess, yeah, to understand like kind of storytelling in video games, like I guess to help us frame it, and then we'll throw it to questions on the floor
For
if you're
sure.
comfortable.
Yeah.
Like what would you consider some of your favorite games? You mentioned Last of Us and things like that, but what are those games that you look at and go, these are the kind of the gold standard for what I would like to aspire, well, not even aspire to be, but like I would like to take as seriously or do as good a job as these guys did.
Oh boy. I mean,
Yeah,
The
I'll
Last
put you on
of
the
Us
spot.
is right up there for
Yeah.
me.
I mean, Last of Us is phenomenal. Let's be
It
real.
is.
So,
I
yeah.
mean, it's just
Yeah.
it's beautiful
Yeah, it's
storytelling.
one of those games I could argue with people, as long as it's good faith, I could argue with people for hours, because there's just so many different complex characters, and it's
Yeah.
all a very real and breathable world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Spider-Man. I mean, a
Spider-
lot
oh,
of
the
like, the
Spider-Man
Insomniac
ones, yes.
games are really good. So like Spider-Man and
Yeah.
Spider-Man 2 were really good. And I was in it, but I was like a villain, or not even a villain. It was just a mook in it.
Yeah, yeah,
I was the female Hunter 5. So
Gotcha,
that tells
yeah.
you the and you know, female Hunter 5 did have a personality
Yeah.
to her. There was a consistent personality, but it wasn't like I had a character arc.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
My character arc was I'm alive fighting and then I get knocked out, or possibly if you're playing as Venom, absolutely murdered.
Right.
But I would love to do sink my teeth into one of those meteor roles
sure.
on something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And throw me into a volume. I would love to do performance capture.
Yeah. And I guess that is the thing. Have you had much experience with, like, we mentioned motion capture and stuff before. Have you had much experience with that, or it's more, for you guys, you just convey a lot with your
So
voices?
I've done facial capture and some performance capture for a couple of things, and then I did a version for WWE 2022
Nice.
question mark. We did basically like the equivalent of like PCAP but dubbing.
Right, yeah.
So it was cool because I had to memorize this monologue as the character, like complete with the breaths and,
I see that sometimes, and I find it so interesting. It's just like you're taking someone else's performance and you are doing the facial capture.
The facial capture.
Yeah, wow,
And it's so
So
technical.
interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's like going, they breathed at this point, so you have to go like...
Yeah, it's like memorizing Gilbert and Sullivan.
Right,
Yeah.
Right?
You gotta
'Cause
hit those beats,
It's so technical, and if you miss one little beat, you've thrown the whole rhythm off.
I've done somewhat similarly. I've done like characters that are overlapping voices, and that's also like the other person records first, and so you need to memorize the cadence with which they said this.
Absolutely.
So that you can have the exact memorize the cadence with which they said this, so that when they're together,
They can react
sounds like two voices literally speaking in tandem. And there's like, they can do a little bit of like stretch compress and stuff like that to make it work, but like you got to get pretty close in the
Those are
first
fun
place.
when you get to follow the leader. Like, I love those technical little challenges.
I did that, but then on something else recently, I was the first person to go, and I was like, oh, I get to make the choices. And it was like someone it was a reprised role where I had done that in the first place, and I was doing it again, and I was like, guess what? You're working off of me now. I felt very vindictive. In the best possible way.
You're like, suck it, everybody else.
I was like, you know what? You follow my acting beats now.
If it's a race circuit, you're the lead car. You're setting the pace.
Yeah.
And there have been times too where someone else has done like the performance capture, which includes the pace of the speaking.
Absolutely.
And then I have to actually go in as the character voice,
which is almost
and
like
match
dubbing.
It's like dubbing,
in a
but
way.
I have to say I do get a little annoyed with that sometimes when it's like a character I'm playing, but I'm following someone else's like. Speaking
Choices.
cadence.
Well, it changes
Because
your
it's-
inflections.
It
and-
changes my inflection, and it's the sort of thing where like it's possible that I've spent more time with the character than that person has,
sure.
and I'm like, that's not how they speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, and it's frustrating, but at the same time, it's like, hey, that's the job.
That's
you
the
gotta
job.
do it.
That's
You
it.
gotta do
That's
it.
right.
As long as it sounds good in the end, it doesn't matter.
That's true.
As long as the punters didn't know, what's the difference?
Right.
Exactly.
One last one before we throw it open, and it kind of ties into that. You mentioned obviously there's a lot of solo work, there's studio work, there's things like that. Do you have a preference? Like, would you prefer to work with? Let's say you're in a scene with a
Oh my
co-star.
God.
Would you
I
prefer
love ensemble work.
Yeah.
If I could do it like they do in the old timey like animation and some of the animation now, I would do it in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
The closest you can get to that is if the other actor in the scene has recorded and you get
Yeah.
to play off of them.
Exactly.
But usually it's just not feasible given the
Yeah.
breadth of material we're covering in an individual
Exactly.
session to have the rest of the actors in there, because then everything goes slower.
Well, and I guess that comes back to your mention about you don't have to be in LA, but sometimes it helps to be in certain geographical locations. Yeah.
Well, the actual reason why some studios are very aggressively going back to in-studio work is that's the technical stuff that no one thinks about. When everyone is recorded on the exact same microphone in the exact same space with the exact same
have to
engineer,
play with-
the exact same preamp, the technology means that everyone sounds like they are in the same space.
So it's more consistent for their workflow.
Yeah.
In
yeah.
the at the very beginning of the pandemic, I know a lot of sound editors were so frustrated
I'm
because it was
sure.
just like, I mean, not even counting the people
Well,
who had their
your
USB
closet
mics.
and my closet don't sound the same.
No, they don't. And it's the sort of thing that, like, to the average ear, you're not necessarily going to pick
You
up
don't
on
pick
it.
up the exhaust fan in the corner, and then you listen to it back. Oh
Yeah.
God.
And when I have to pause for an airplane.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, exactly.
Which
yeah.
happens in some studios as well. And when you're
Exactly.
too close to Bob Hope Airport in Burbank.
Bob Hope Airport.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, no, again, even from recording TV, we've had that where it's like, you don't hear the fan until afterwards. We can't record it after because it doesn't set like...
Yeah.
Well, I definitely understand. Have we got any questions from the floor? I'll throw it open to anyone. Anyone want to ask a question? Oh, we had hands go up yesterday like crazy. Now there's no
don't
one.
raise your hands at once.
So-
Yeah,
Oh,
if
there
it's
we go.
something you would have
That's
asked
the
yesterday,
spirit.
we can always answer it today.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you said how like cultural influences on roles you've changed stuff up. Has there been any instances where it's like personal interests that you know about that you've changed a role about?
Ooh, I feel like I have, but I have to think about it.
I know. I mean, I can think of times when I've suggested like word changes or something because of something. I'm like, oh, my character wouldn't do it that way, or she wouldn't say it that way.
It's not out yet, so I can't specify what it is. But a musician said to another musician, "Good luck," and I was like,
Nah.
"Should be break a leg."
That's right.
I specifically was like, "Nope, it's got to be break a leg. It's got to be that." I was like, we recorded it as good luck, but I was like, but to be clear, I want the break a leg version of the line to be the keeper and the other one the alt. So I'm curious to see which one actually comes
Makes it,
out.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things where I was like, it feels dirty.
Oh, it totally
to say
does.
good luck right now. I'm like, it doesn't feel
Yeah.
good.
Well, it kind of ties back to what we were talking about, like, international slang, but it's cultural slang in groups and specific.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like you'd say it's like, I mean, I know what you're saying, but you don't sound, I don't want to say natural, but you don't sound like, it's like, are you sure you're part of X community? Because like, that's none of us would ever say that.
Right.
Like,
Yeah. It's like the audio thing. Like, it's another way that your ears are going to go, what?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
It's like I know that, sometimes when a character has an accent in something, people can hear when it's not an authentic accent.
For sure.
And like there are people who are really good at mimicking accents, and then there are some people who can do like a really generic version of an accent, and maybe it doesn't feel specific, and
It
it's like
doesn't sit on the ear badly.
it's the sort of thing where it's like, I've seen that about German in particular. It's like, like this sounds like really high Bavarian, and it doesn't make sense for this character to be high Bavarian.
Right.
And it's
Well,
like, damn, okay.
Well, that's the Arnie joke. Is like in Austria, it's considered a very like country rural accent.
Yeah.
It'd be like someone
Yeah.
coming with like a big southern drawl kind of thing. And
Yeah, that's the thing.
Right.
It's like
I
you
mean,
got
like various Irish accents are the same way, right?
all the different British accents.
So my grandmother was from Belfast. My pop was from Dublin.
Gotcha.
So
Yeah.
I hear the Northern Irish and the Southern Irish straight away. Like, okay, you're Belfast.
It changes it. It changes it, and I'm sure. I mean, there are a breadth of Australian accents as
for
well,
sure.
and I'm sure if someone went in with the most like a very educated like academic person with the most Crocodile Dundee accent, it
Right.
would probably be like, that's a choice.
If you were doing this
Exactly.
con in Brisbane, you'd be like, what are these people saying to me? It's like, what do Queenslanders even mean? Like,
Right. Well, and now we're all learning our accents from Bluey, so we all sound like Bluey.
true.
Yeah.
Well, they're Queenslanders, funnily enough, so there you go. Yeah.
There we go.
Any more questions from the audience? Yeah.
So I remember seeing somewhere where like voice actors in games, they don't get to see what's happening in the game, and you just sort of have to guess what the scene entails. Does that what you guys experience?
Absolutely.
It varies for sure.
Yeah.
Sometimes you know, sometimes you don't.
Sometimes if we're working on a cutscene or something where they've already sort of have an animatic or an idea,
Or
we
they
get
rigged it or something.
we get to play along. But a lot of times you have to rely on your imagination. So cultivating the theater of the mind is a really great muscle to have, so that you can just go there. And even if it's not exactly how it plays out in the visuals, at least you gave yourself those imagined circumstances.
I have two differing examples of that. One is, this was on Dragon Age. It was, we are addressing a crowd, but they were like, we don't know based off of like model budget and technical limitations if this is going to be a crowd of 20 or a crowd of 100.
Yeah.
So
Right.
let's do one version of the line as if you are speaking to 20 people, and another version of line is if you are projecting across this
yelling to a
entire
crowd,
space here.
Exactly.
And then another one was it was a localized game, and I wasn't seeing, they weren't playing me audio ref And I remember looking at the game afterwards and seeing that I had played it like, okay, yes, we're going to do this. And then I see the way that the character's animated, and she's like, okay, yes, we are going to do this. And I was like, oh, I'm not making I am not speaking as if I'm going like, yes, let's go. Like, I'm not doing
You're
it
not
that
throwing
way.
theater hands at it.
Yeah.
I was just like, God damn it. Like,
Right.
I don't sound like I'm doing that motion.
And that it's not your fault though.
It's no one's fault because
Right.
sometimes that stuff gets like finalized and the
It goes-
director
yeah.
doesn't know
Yeah.
either and the client doesn't necessarily
I
know.
definitely know that feeling. I've
it's
definitely been there.
And it feels like it's the sort of thing where it's like you kind of blame yourself because you're like, no, it looks wrong and
Like,
everyone's
I
gonna
would have made a
blame
different
me.
choice if I only knew.
If we only had
Yeah.
this information.
And that's also the problem I think with a lot of, especially when you talk social media criticism, is like, well, they don't know the process you had to go through, and like I say, it might have gone through 4 or 5 iterations.
Yeah.
It might have gone
Yeah.
through, and you get to the end, you're like, well, we don't have the budget to do X. We're just going to have to do Y. So this is going to have to do, but they don't have that context because for them, they're just experiencing it
Absolutely.
as the person who is consuming it. You know what I
Do
mean?
you
So-
know how many times I have played a character played by another actor?
Oh, ditto.
That they just couldn't bring that person in for a mixed line or pickup. So it's secretly me. And y'all just don't know, and I'm not going to tell you.
It's like
They'll
ghostwriting,
never
but
know.
for vocals. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the sort of thing where sometimes it's like, ooh, like this line was mislabeled, but we already brought the actress in and it was her. So, Allegra, can you just kind of do an
it.
impression? And I was like, okay.
Yep. I know that feeling.
Yeah, it happened.
Industry secrets with Allegra.
Yeah. Oh, I've got examples, and I feel like it would kill
She
the.
has receipts.
I would
y'all.
kill the. It's so interesting, but it would also kill the immersion.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Or like sometimes like on a simuldub for anime. An actor isn't available for a week, so
Yeah,
someone else
yeah.
has gone in.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know if I want to say this one, but I mean, I guess it's kind of there. Who here watches Jujutsu Kaisen?
I'm sorry. What is that?
I know. What's that? So, you know the scene with Mei Mei and Wee Wee in the hotel room?
Yeah.
Sarah wasn't available that week, so that was actually me. And I was like, oh, okay. And they were like, can you just voice match Sarah? And I was like, I can try.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know I was going to do that when I was coming
Sure, I'll
in.
give
I
it
was
a
just
go.
like,
Yeah.
I was like, Miwa has some lines. All right, let's go. And they're like, can you also play Wee Wee? And I was like, oh, okay. But that happens. It happens
no,
and
it
it's
does.
fine. And sometimes the people go like, hey, it's not me this week. It's actually this person and stuff like that.
For sure.
Or like, God, the number of times someone's like gotten really sick and blown out their voice, but the season's still going. So it's like,
Yeah, because I guess that's the hard part. Like, if you think of it like an athlete, you mentioned your voice is a vocal instrument.
Yeah.
You've got to think of it like that. Yeah, if a sports player throws out their knee, they're not playing anymore. If someone
Yeah.
throws out their voice, they get laryngitis, they get a
Yeah.
cold. Because you can notice it even. And I use mainstream animation as a thing, but even like Family Guy, like you can tell that week they had a cold. Like South
Oh,
Park,
absolutely.
that week Trey Parker had a cold for sure,
Absolutely.
right? Like,
Yeah.
I hear stuff back from me, and I'm like, ooh, I had allergies that week.
oh God, I'll be like, boy, I'm gonna like play something soon, and I'm gonna hear myself going like, oh damn, that was like I was recovering from laryngitis when that
Yeah,
happened.
yeah,
Like, ugh.
For sure.
Yeah, no, it's just kind of funny when that kind of thing happens, like those little things where
Yeah.
sometimes someone's just not available or
Yep.
they're sick.
Or,
the
like,
show it goes on
The
with the
show
show.
goes on,
Yeah.
and we did a cutscene for something, and they realized they didn't pick up a character in the cutscene,
Yeah.
and then they were like, "Can you just do it?" I'm like, "Yeah, fine, done."
Yeah, exactly. It just happens.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's if they have the ability because it's a long production, they'll go like, okay, yeah, no, we can just reschedule her. It's
Yeah,
fine.
we'll do it next week or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to say who because it didn't end up mattering in the end. But I had a friend who ended up getting summoned for jury duty.
Oh gosh.
And
Been
do you guys
there.
have jury duty?
Yeah,
here?
we do.
Okay,
It's
okay.
a very similar system.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's summoned for jury duty right before the game started, and she actually got put on a case.
Oh my gosh.
And she almost lost the role.
job.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because she was on jury duty, and she was just like, they're taking too long with this case. I really want to play this character. Oh my God. Or
She just starts screaming, guilty, 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 guilty,
right.
guilty.
It's just like, it's guilty, they're guilty. One time I lost a role. Someone was like, we would love you to play this, but this is we're recording over the course of a week. And I was like, I'm in Hawaii. And they're like, okay, bye.
Yep.
I was like, no.
That actually happened to me. I was up for a role. They shortlisted me. They said, "Are you available this week?" I'm like, "It's my sister's wedding in Ireland. I can't." And I lost it.
Oh, I actually lost something because of jury duty too. I was like waiting for jury duty, and they just wanted to bring me in for additional voices, and the client really liked me and was like, "Can we get Allegra?" And it was like, no, she's kind of like waiting to find out
You're
if
in
she's
the
going to have
limbo.
jury
Yeah,
duty. So like they didn't want to risk it, and so they had someone else do it. And it was just like additional voices,
Yeah.
but it would have been fun
It
to
would have
go
been
in.
fun.
And it's a paycheck, and you
Of
miss
course.
it.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
love paychecks.
Especially because do you guys get paid for jury duty or
Yeah,
anything along
it's,
those
it's,
Yeah, you
it's
get like
similar
a
to
small
stipend
stipend,
and all
yeah.
that kind of
Okay,
stuff. Yeah.
well,
but
yeah.
ours is basically minimum wage, so you get paid a minimum
Oh,
wage.
it's even
day, so.
worse than
Yeah,
minimum
we get
wage.
less than that.
Less than
Yeah,
minimum
no,
wage.
yeah. I've read some of it. I mean, yeah, we can have that conversation all day, but yeah, it's minimum wage plus. I think they actually pay a little bit of your superannuation, all that kind of
Okay.
stuff as well. So, yeah.
No, it is
Yeah.
like $5 an hour.
We'll
in
pay
the
for your
United
Crazy.
parking
States or
in downtown
something.
LA, and here's some money for lunch. Bye.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really bad, and especially when you are a gig worker like an actor, you're
Yeah.
just like, cool. This could literally be the only gig I have
For
this
sure.
month. Especially if like things are like weird and spotty for you.
Yeah.
If that's the only gig you were supposed to have that month, you're
sure.
screwed.
It's very,
For
very
sure.
similar. Obviously, we're at the Game Expo, and it's very similar for us, where it's like, this is our big one for the 3 months. We'll have a couple of small gigs for the next thing, and then
Yep.
it's like, in 3 months, something. But if something had happened this week, like, say there was a giant car race that was going to take people away
I'm sorry,
from...
like
Oh,
a
yeah,
car race.
well,
Who
yeah.
would do that?
Yeah, and so
Who
it's
would do
like...
that?
Yeah, so...
what would that be?
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, and so it is that thing of especially when you do have these gig work or this like event or like it builds to a crescendo. I kind of compare it to farming almost. Like you sow and you sow and you wait and you water and then it's like now the week is time to harvest. And if we can't do it this week, we might as well not do it. We might
Right.
as well not start. And I feel
Right.
like that's very similar to
Yeah.
you guys. in
Yeah.
that sense.
And sometimes, when you think about the beginning of the pandemic, too, it's just like, we were actively working on 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim when the pandemic started.
I remember.
And some people
I really love that game, by the way. I did notice
Isn't
you
it a
were there.
beautiful
game?
Beautiful game.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that game means so much to me. But some people had already wrapped recording. Some
Yeah.
people had not started recording. And there was maybe 3 of us who were in the middle of the game.
Right, yeah.
And there's we had to stop,
Yeah.
obviously. And then a few months later, they were like, this game's coming out later this year.
We gotta figure it out.
We just gotta get going.
Yeah.
Especially because I'm sure it was the case here too. Everyone's like, how long are we gonna be stuck inside?
Right.
Like, yeah, maybe we can, in a few months, we'll be out and we'll be
Yeah,
able to go back to work.
We were so
Max
young
copium,
and
yeah.
optimistic then.
There were a couple things I was in the middle of.
Uh-huh.
I was in a session for this movie called Birthday Wonderland. It was an animated movie. Erica Mendez was
Oh, nice.
directing me on it. And in the middle of that session, I happened to look down on my phone, and there was an alert saying, Mayor Eric Garcetti has just announced that the city of Los Angeles is shutting down,
Yeah.
and everyone is going to be stuck. And I'm looking at my phone, and I go, it's like we've got 30 minutes to an hour left in the session. I go, hey guys, we're shutting down. And the engineer and Erica look, and they're just like, oh. And I was like, yeah,
What do we do?
do we keep going?
Yeah.
No,
It's
yeah,
like,
no,
we'll
no
just
one
keep
look at your
going.
phone for the next hour.
Right.
Just don't look.
We keep
Oh,
going.
yeah.
Well, and here's the tragedy. Earlier in the session, I'd said, hey, there's this big screaming section. Let's save it for the end.
Yeah.
We were so thrown that we forgot to do it for the end, which meant that I ended up having to do the big screaming section, writing my own game from home.
Oh, God.
Which was just miserable. I was
So
like,
fun
no,
for
we
you. I
forgot
love
to do
that.
it. We forgot to do it.
Oh, man.
Oh, God. Were you mid-session when you found out, or were you just at
I
home?
wasn't mid-session. I was working on a TV production.
Oh, God.
So I was office managing a television production that shot outdoors, and we had just brought in the Australian cast.
Oh my god.
And then we had to then come home and say,
And their plane was empty.
Yeah.
It was like
Yeah.
whatever, all of these contestants on a plane, they had the whole plane, they could do cartwheels in the aisle. And then we landed, and then the news broke, and you just,
It was
okay.
go home, guys.
Sorry, it was nice to meet you.
I remember it was like about a year into the pandemic too, like as everyone was starting to get vaccinated, but like it wasn't
Yeah.
consistent yet. I remember you had a TV production
Yeah.
gig and you were getting tested every single
my
day,
gosh.
and then one person would test positive and the entire production would shut
Everything is
down for
done.
4 days.
That was very similar to Melbourne. We had
Yeah.
some of the strictest in the world. It was
Yeah.
very much so. And we were doing TV production at the time, so we were lucky in that if we needed to meet in the studio, we had to fill out all the paperwork and stuff, but we could do it because it was a pre-booked production.
sure.
But I
Yeah.
remember going through all that as well, so I definitely
Yeah.
understand. Yeah,
It's you. Your production work was so chaotic. I remember you
was-
hopping in the group chat and being like, "Haha, someone came in with COVID."
Yeah, look who's lucky. I've been exposed. Yay!
pandemic's over though, haven't you heard? That's right.
Supposedly.
We got time for probably one more question. Anyone else? Anyone? Oh yeah, one more.
Oh, we got a couple.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're gonna runner, and then
Who's
yeah,
gonna
I
get
know,
the
I
lucky
know.
microphone?
The production are yelling at me. It's fine, as much as they yell. No. Oh yeah, no. We'll do the two. Make it quick.
Yeah,
make it quick.
we'll
Super
do
quick.
two.
Super
Perfect.
quick.
So my question is, like, so there's one scenario where I asked my teacher, how do I do a serious scene? And his reply was, just clench your bottom. And I'm just like, what is that going to do?
Clench your butt? He
Yeah,
said?
so I
Yeah,
clenched
clench
it,
your
and
butt
it
cheek,
feels-
yeah.
I mean, I guess it puts a lot of tension in your
Yeah.
body.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There
that
are
tension.
weird, like, physical tricks you can do and stuff like that, but, like, I don't know, put yourself in the moment.
I mean, you can physically change your physicality to make things happen with your voice, but also think about the intentionality behind it.
Yeah.
You know, so what is the emotion?
Exactly.
Just like if you're having a fight with somebody in the game, there's a reason why you're having a fight. It's not all of a sudden, slap.
It's not just because we're fighting.
It's Tuesday, slap. No, it's.
I mean, I do
you
that,
stole
but,
something
you
from
know.
me or something.
It's Tuesday.
You know, but something happened to make you want to like do violence, right? You know, I chose violence today because you stole something from me. You harmed something I loved. You created an emotion so big in me that I had to physically react.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's where that comes from.
That said, bending your knees and clenching your butt is very useful when you're singing.
Fair. It's
Just
also great
squeeze
for
out every
strong
bit of-
glutes.
Yeah,
You
it's
know?
because, like, you know, from like literal physical technical stuff, there are ways that
Sure.
like activating certain muscles can help,
Right.
But not for eliciting specific emotions. You are
Fair.
doing it. That is a physical technique for physical vocal things,
Yeah.
not for intent and emotion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like cupping your hand around your mouth. Yeah, it's a very physical, very simple, practical. guy,
Yeah.
We'll go to the last one.
Yeah, hi.
Hiya.
So I was just wondering, when you were recording 13 Sentinels, like,
Yes.
how, so you...
No spoilers.
It's hard, but
I know,
it's
I know, it's
basically, when you play like a, how do I put this without spoiling it? It's just hard. When you
Just
play,
different iterations of the same person.
Yeah, different iterations of
Yeah.
the same person. Like, how difficult was it during that entire process, especially with, you know, the pandemic and all, having to make sense of it all, basically?
Well, make sense of it all is something we can both talk about
Yeah.
because the director, Christian, would just kind of, sometimes he'd go like, look, this is what's happening. I could get into the reasons why,
Yeah.
but like we don't need to
Sometimes
cover
you
the
have
reason
to trust
why.
the process.
You just trust the process, and the director, literally, it was wibbly wobbly, timey wimey
Timey-wimey,
was what
yeah.
he said every time. He's like, so
Every
you're
time.
here because wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. And I'm like,
Yeah.
all right. So what am I feeling? Good. As for that, the thing that did make it really easy, and this is the case for any time you are playing multiple people in the same project,
Mm-hmm.
you are not switching back and forth between them. You are following one individual thread and then going back to the beginning and following the other thread.
Yeah.
So I'm sure when you were fighting yourself
Yeah.
as twins or
Yeah.
as sisters versus, that game, or in Jujutsu Kaisen when I was literally fighting myself as Maki and Miwa, we were taking the scene, one
Yeah.
at a time. And sometimes you can sort of know what you're going to do when you reapproach the scene later, and it
Sure.
kind of helps you make decisions and
Yeah.
whatnot. But at the very least, you're not juggling going like, I'm doing this. No, wait, don't do that. Yes, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
No, please don't. You can do it,
Yeah.
but like, it's too much.
And you know, that's how they used to record animation, right? Like
Yeah.
Mel Blanc would just talk to
Talk to
himself.
himself, yeah.
Right? But now, because of the way digital works, you can just take the one track
Yep.
and follow that story and follow that intention all the way to the end of its logical conclusion.
And it's easier on the engineer to do it that way too.
100%.
Now that it's digital, you just stay in the Maki track, and then you're like, cool, now we're going to go into the Miwa track rather than
Exactly.
switching back and forth
and
the
then
entire time.
you can set yourself up for
Exactly.
success because you've already done the things previously, and then you know what you're reacting to.
Much as when I'm sure when you were like escalating an argument as Sister A,
Yeah.
you could.
Yeah, and they were,
you're
like-
setting
Exactly.
the way that it
you
escalates.
set- you set the peaks and the troughs.
They're
like,
twin
yeah,
brothers.
yeah.
They're
Exactly.
like, I hate you. No, I hate you. Yeah, she said it first. They said it that. You know it's gonna go there, and so you
Exactly.
let it build.
Yeah. So yeah, it's thank God we don't have to do it the way Mel Blanc did it. We can just kind of take it one step at a time, and
Yeah.
it makes it a lot easier.
Absolutely.
That is about the end of it. For what it's worth, it turns out the shrimp on the Barbie thing was the Paul Hogan ad. It sat in my head for ages, and I remembered it was like the Paul Hogan ad, the tourism ad in the 80s. Anyway.
So did you
That's how
do it to
Americans
yourself?
in the 80s learned their Australian accents.
Yeah, and I was
So,
like, yeah.
so basically, you did it to yourselves.
Crocodile Dundee, we did it to ourselves,
Okay.
yeah.
Damn.
All
Yeah,
right.
unfortunate.
Damn.
No. And on that sad note, Allegra Clark Ratana, thank you very much for joining us today on stage.
Thank you, guys.
Coming up next, we'll have some chip tunes. Go get a drink. Go to Lou. Whatever you've got to do. We'll be about 10
I love
minutes
it.
setting up.
Before you do that, can we all take a selfie?
Yeah, we're gonna
of
take
course,
another
mate, take a
selfie.
selfie. Who wants to jump in the selfie with us? That's not the answer. Who wants to jump in the selfie with us? Much better.